Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video we are going to talk about how to peek messages and receive messages from the Azure Storage Queue. If you have not gone through my previous videos, you could just go through the part 2 and part 1. In the last part, we actually created a new message and posted it to the Azure Storage Queue. Now in this one, we are going to see how we could use the peek as well as receiving of the messages from the Azure Storage Queue. Now, there are technically two ways by which we can receive messages. One is the peek method. The peek method receives the message and does not delete the message from the queue. That's one. And receive is another way where we receive the message and it actually removes it from the queue. So in order to kind of display in a visual format, so let's say we have an Azure Storage Queue and the peek would actually receive the message and it will not delete the message from the storage queue. So it's kind of a one-way operation. You just receive it, but the message is still there within the storage queue. In the real world, the receive is more a better option where you actually receive the message from the storage queue, you process that message, and then finally you delete the message from the queue also, because we don't want any another application to actually start receiving that message again and process it, because it has already been processed, and because it is used for decoupling, so we don't really want to do that way. So these are the two things which we are going to cover within this video. We'll firstly see how we could use the peek message, and then we'll write a second method, practically see it, how we could receive the message, and finally delete it from the storage queue. So friends, we are going to now write two methods, where one of the method would actually use the peek functionality to get all the messages, but they do not remove those messages from the storage queue. And the second would be to receive those messages and finally delete it also after processing or whatever you want to do. So in order to give you a more context, we already have a RDQ storage queue. And if you go into this, you have two messages that we created yesterday, and those two methods are out here. So we'll now programmatically see how we could actually read those messages within C# in the help of Visual Studio 2022. Now, these were the two functions which we wrote yesterday. And now let's try to write another function. So we'll say void, this is a peek message. So let's say we'll write a peek message, and then the peek message, I'm defining one integer. This integer represents how many messages you want to peek or get from the actual storage queue. So let's say I have a max messages, and because I have two, so I'm just giving it 2. You could read 5 or 10 based upon what kind of a requirement you have. And then I'm gonna copy the same steps out here. I'll just use that and then paste it out here. And so we have a queue client which is there, which uses a connection string and a queue name which is already there. And then because you want to receive the peeked messages, so there is a class called as peeked message, and we'll use it, peeked message, and this would be returning messages because it actually returns a peeked messages out here. So we'll just use quick actions to see your storage queue models. Okay, that's fine. And now we'll say client dot peek messages, and then we'll actually pass on the how many messages you want to receive. So we have already created a max messages, so I can just pass it on here to actually specify that these number of messages I want to read it. Now because you are actually reading multiple messages, so it's technically returning you an array. Now for I can just use a for each loop to go through the messages and then see how that could work and then get its information or anything. So I'll use in the variable items in the messages, and then I could just use that is this. So I just need to deserialize it and then get that. So what I can do here is I can use it in the form of a, let's say, temp. And because my class is dpt temp is equal to, I'll say, once you receive the messages, so you just need to use the JSON convert dot deserialize, because now you want to deserialize the object. And deserialize which object? Because it's technically the department information. And then item dot body dot to string. So we are actually deserializing it. We are, when you actually sent it, you serialized it. Now you're actually deserializing it. And once you deserializing it, you are actually using the item dot body that represents the complete message. I'm converting it into a string and then storing it in the temp department, because the object is deserialized into the class object. So once it is deserialized, so we could actually use it, let's say, to write on some information. So I could just simply say console dot write line, and then I could say, let's say, the item info is, and I could just use, let's say, curly bracelets, and I'll say temp dot department number. And that's one thing which you could actually use that. And then you could also say temp dot and temp dot dname, which is another information you want to display. So those are the two information, and I'm just putting up a read line. So if you want to put up a read line afterwards rather than in the for loop, so that we could just see the output, what exactly happens, and see whether this works for us or not. So this is department number and this is this. Okay, so let's try and run this and see what exactly we get. So once it runs it, hello world. So the message was sent to the, we didn't call that. So let's actually call this message. We are actually still calling that send messages class. So I'm just gonna comment it out, and I'm gonna call this now, let's say, peak messages message, and we'll just call this. Now because accidentally we use the send class object, so if we go back to the Azure storage queue, so now we would have another message also, which is third message. So but we are just going to read the two messages, and let's say we'll just delete this message. We don't need this, so I'll just dequeue it. Okay, so this is deleted. I just have only two messages, which looks fine. And let's go back now and call this out, run this program. So once we run this, hello world is there. So it just prints us, if you see, the item info is 20 and it reads out sales, and the item info is 10 and it reads out technology, because we are able to deserialize the object. Now if you want some another information about this also, so you could actually do this before doing the deserialization. So you just simply say console.writeLine, and I could just simply say info about message peaked, and what I can do is I can say item dot, so there is one body, which is another one, and then you could also do item dot message dot id, which is the actual id, kind of a number for us, a unique number. So let's say if we now try to read it and run this around, so let's stop that and call this again. So run this. So let's try running it. So if you see the info about the message, so this is how the message body, like this body was completely red, and this is the message ID that was being there in the Azure storage. So this is the message ID. It's a kind of a GUID which is stored, and the message body is there. And now we are using the same body to actually deserialize that and make sure that we are actually using it around. So this way we are getting the message, we are getting some important properties about message like body, message ID, and we could deserialize that to actually construct a object and display those relevant information. Now once the peak message now we understand, we could also use the receive message, which is more likely clearing out the message once it is done. So what we'll do here is we'll just copy this and we'll paste it out here. This is going to be receive message, so I'm just gonna remove this or comment it out. Now peak message is already done, so we'll just say receive message. So that's there, integer is going to be there, these are going to be two objects. Okay, that's fine. And now rather than peak message, so we'll use receive messages. So that's the one which we are going to use, but the receive messages does not return an array of peaked messages, rather it returns you the queue message. So we'll just use queue message. So yes, it just gives me queue messages, and the messages, they are in the form of an array. We could get the same information, something like this, and we could actually be deserialize it, and looks fine. And afterwards we just want to kind of remove that from the stuff. So what we can do here is, so I can use the client dot delete message. I could use that, and I could pass on item dot message ID, that's one which I want to delete, and item dot, I would say, pop receipt. Now these are the two arguments which I need to pass. It's a kind of a pop receipt is like this item has to be received, removed out from the queue, and the other application should not be able to read it. It's a kind of a confirmation that this item has been processed. So I'm using a delete message out here, the message ID and the pop receipt, and this is the receive message. So I'll just use it over here rather than the peak message. So we'll use the receive message. So we'll receive two messages. It would receive, get the same information done, and then it is also going to remove the messages from our storage queue. Now go back and refresh it. So if you see, I still have two messages, but now if I just run this, so let's say we'll just stop this and run this around one more time. So hello world. So the information about this information, so because I didn't change this message peaked, but still it is the same. We just need to understand the functionality. So you see that the complete item.body, item.message, and item.id, and that every information is there, and then it has also deleted it. So let me stop that, and if I go back to this, I refresh it here. So if you see, both the messages have been processed, the queue is empty. So whatever the purpose of the decoupling was, somebody has sent us a message to process it, the other application actually received it, processed it, and it actually deleted it. So I hope guys this is gonna be helpful to you, useful for you. Now you understand how you could create a storage queue. You could actually create a messages into that. You could actually peek those messages, or you could actually receive those messages and process them and even delete it from the queue. So this way you could actually do some kind of a decoupling operation within an application where some processing takes multiple, let's say some kind of a time where one application cannot wait for the other application to complete. So I'll be coming back with more videos. So if you like this video, please do subscribe to my channel. Please do like this video. Please comment upon this video what kind of technologies or other topics which you would like me to cover. I'll definitely try to cover it around, and hope everyone is safe, and wherever you are, be safe and stay safe. And thank you for watching this video. Have a nice one.